CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy. This is Series 1 of Conversations with Women in African Philanthropy, a CAPSI program known as Adɔyɛ. The series was recorded at the sidelines of a retreat that took place at the WITS Rural Facility in Limpopo in January 2025, hosted by CAPSI's Adɔyɛ program and Nawi AfriFem Collective. Adɔyɛ is dedicated to celebrating and amplifying the contributions of African women in philanthropy while creating spaces for dialogue, learning, and collaboration. Adɔyɛ operates under the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, aligning its mission with broader goals of promoting effective philanthropic practices in Africa. Through its efforts, Adɔyɛ seeks to build knowledge, foster dialogue, cultivate partnerships, and advocate for policies that support women in philanthropy.
Welcome to another episode of our Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Moyo. We are shooting this special episode here at the WITS Rural Facility at the margins of the writing retreat that has been organized for women who are coming from different geographies, different cultures, experiences, but also spanning different age groups. And today I'm really excited to be joined by my sister, Bisi. It's been such a long time since we connected. And when we connected last year, I think in person in New York, I said to you, there's this thing coming up, a writing retreat, but we also, I know you were going to attend the APN assembly in Victoria Falls. I would want us to find ways of reconnecting again. And here we are again.
Yes, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much, Becky.
Thank you so much. I want to introduce you the way I know. I
Okay.
know there are so many formal introductions that are written there, and our viewers could also, look at your biography. But we are joined today by Bisi Adeleye-Fayemi, who, for many of us in the philanthropic sector, is one of the first leaders that we came to know of when it comes to issues of philanthropy, institutional building, but also having set up one of the biggest Pan-African foundation, the African Women's Development Fund. But secondly, Bisi also served as the director of Akinawa Mama Africa before setting up the AWDF. Thirdly, I think for most of us, we don't do this. Bisi also went into what we could call politics, served as the first lady of Ekiti State for 2 terms between 2010 and 2014, and 2018 and 2022. Of course, we are going to learn more as we go. I think as we are about to shoot here, you were telling us about the title that you are known for. Tandi, what is the name? Erel?
Erelu.
Yeah, so nice to have you join us. I've been really looking forward to have this conversation with you. Maybe I would start firstly in 2008 or 9, I remember when we were in Victoria Falls, I was reminding you that you and I actually penned an article called "Can New African Foundations Level the Playing Field?" And this was at the height when we were really thinking about the direction that philanthropy was taking, and new foundations were coming up. But of course, by then, AWDF had already been in place for a long period of time. So I want us to start with the AWDF story, and then we can work our way backwards and forwards. Firstly, I'm aware that there were 3 of you who actually established AWDF. Take us through the conceptualization of the idea all the way to creating and establishing AWDF.
Thank you very much, Becky, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. I will try to keep it as brief as possible because it's something that spanned over a number of years. AWDF came out of 2 separate endeavors that decided to become one. The first piece of the story started with Joanna Foster and Hilda Tadria. Joanna Foster, may her soul rest in peace, at the time was the regional coordinator for Women in Law and Development Africa, WILDAF. And Dr. Hilda Tadria was working with the World Bank. In 1994, at the Dakar Preparatory Conference for Beijing, these two women got together and started talking about the idea of having a fund for African women. Both of them had attended a workshop organized by the Global Fund for Women. And the Global Fund for Women, which is based in San Francisco, had by that time been funding women's rights organizations around the world. And so Joanna and Hilda felt if there can be a women's fund based in the United States, showing solidarity with women around the world, with feminist organizations, women's movements around the world, why can't we do the same for the African continent? And at the time, there had been some conversations in other countries around the idea of setting up a women's fund, but it sounded like something that would be extremely difficult to try. But these two women wanted to see if they could make it happen. So they started those conversations in 1994, and the Global Fund for Women promised to help. There was even a solidarity grant that they offered the two founding sisters, but they didn't have the time to take it up, but they started those conversations. Around that time, I was the director of Akinamama Africa. We were based in London. And the focus of our work at Akinamama was providing leadership opportunities and policy advocacy opportunities for women's movements on the continent or in different parts of Europe. And during the course of this work, we would get requests from women's organizations on the continent asking us for resources. So one day at one of our board meetings, one of our board members said, why do people keep sending us proposals asking us for money? Is it because we are based in London? They think we are a fund. Yeah. And I responded, actually, why not? Why can't we be a fund? Because it would be a good idea for us to be able to have a grant-making mechanism or a funding mechanism for African women. So AWDF, at Akinamama, we decided that we were going to pursue the idea of starting a women's fund. So one morning in March 1998, Joanna Foster and I met up in London, and the following day we were going to leave for New York for the Commission on the Status of Women. So we met up for coffee in London, and we were exchanging notes about our experiences with donors. My experience at Akinamama and Joanna's experience with WildAF. And then I said, it's about time that we started our own fund as African women. And Joanna stopped right in the middle of the road, and she said, what fund? I said, we need a fund for African women. And Joanna said, welcome on board. We've been thinking about a fund for African women. So that's how the African Women's Development Fund started. So we decided to pull our resources together. I had youthful energy. I had a lot of goodwill and networks. Joanna and Hilda had a vast network within and outside of the continent. So we pulled all the resources that we had together, and we started the African Women's Development Fund. For the first 2 years, it was incubated as a project within Akinamama Africa while I was still the director. And I had been looking for a way to move out of Akinamama, because I've been with Akinamama for over 10 years at that point. And so this seemed like a good exit plan for me. And so in the year 2000, we formally registered the African Women's Development Fund. We did a small launch in New York during the Beijing +5 commemoration. And in 2001, we opened up our offices in Accra, Ghana. And I served as the executive director of AWDF for the first 10 years, till I had to then move back to Nigeria when my husband went into politics.
I know that you have written the story of AWDF, but I also know that it hasn't been popularized, your writing on that. Just briefly, what would be the things that you can pull out in the 10-year period that you were at the helm of AWDF as some of the successes that the first fund of its nature managed to achieve in the continent?
I think for me, the first thing was being able to make the case for an African philanthropic institution. Because there were some people who would talk to about AWDF, and they will be quite receptive, but then they will have this puzzle on their faces, like an African philanthropist, as if it's a bit of an oxymoron. Can you be an African and be a philanthropist at the same time? Because there is this assumption that as African organizations, we are only meant to ask and receive, and we can never be in a position to give towards the development of our communities. Blissfully forgetting that Africans have always given, and no one can come and teach Africans about philanthropy. But yes, we do not, at that time, we didn't have our own, local versions of the Ford Foundation or MacArthur Foundation. It was later that a number of our high net worth individuals on the continent started to set up their institutions, and then we started to have a lot of corporate and community foundations coming together. But at the time, it was important to make the case that we can have African philanthropic institutions. Second for me was learning. The three of us who set up AWDF had strong backgrounds from the academy, from international institutions. Joanna had worked in the corporate sector, she was a lawyer. My background was mostly in feminist movement building and leadership development. But we had not actually worked full-time in philanthropic institutions. We were voluntary members of philanthropic organizations or institutions. At the time, I was on the Africa Grants Committee of Community Relief in the UK, and I served as a trustee of Community Relief in the UK. But having formal philanthropic experience was something that we did not have, and I needed to learn that very quickly. So I leveraged the relationships I had in the donor community. I went to every meeting I was invited to that was connected to philanthropy, wherever that meeting was, and I would be there. And some of the people I learned the most from were those who, like us, were trying to find their way when it came to supporting philanthropic engagements in their movements, in their feminist movements, for example. Other women's funds were emerging in different parts of the world. So relationship building was extremely critical. The third was, there were a number of things I believed we needed to get right from the beginning with regards to structure, our policies, our processes. Because I was aware of the fact that being a grant-making organization that's raising money before we can give grants, we will be under a lot of scrutiny with regards to both the fundraising and the grant-making. So I needed to make sure that we had staff who were well-trained, experienced, and who could do the work that needed to be done, and that our organizational policies, principles, and practices could stand up to scrutiny from anyone who wanted to know what things were looking like. And then another thing that was extremely important to us, especially in the early years, was having a clear communication strategy. Because people needed to know what you were doing, why you were doing it, who you were doing it with. And I'd noticed that a lot of organizations, even those who had been around long before us, were not paying attention to those things. So we decided that we were going to spend a lot of time building up a communications infrastructure that could strengthen our programmatic work, our resource civilization work, and our grant-making work. And all these paid off in the end. There are a couple of other things as well. Oh, and I mustn't forget, in the early days and right up to now, the issue of leadership and governance was absolutely important.
And of course, I mean, I think one would even dare to say you were very bold and ambitious by setting up a Pan-African fund that is specific to supporting women movements. What were some of the possibly earlier barriers that you faced as a Pan-African organization? I think it's one thing to set up a fund that is focusing on one country or one region, but to set up a fund at that time that is Pan-African, obviously, in my view, would have brought up some pressures as well as some barriers. What would be some of those that you recall?
The barriers that we faced at the time were to do with the difficulties in doing work across the continent because of difficult infrastructure in some instances. For example, the banking system, moving money into certain countries, especially if the countries happen to be francophone countries or lusophone countries, or even certain anglophone countries as well, like into South Africa. So that was, so those, there were those barriers, and of course there was the issue of language, because we would receive proposals in so many different languages, and then we had to start building the capacity to be able to respond and not make the grant-making portfolio skewed too much in favor of Anglophone grantees. A lot of the barriers that people felt we were to come up against in the early years were not that much of a problem. For example, people kept asking us, where are you going to find the organizations you are going to give support to? And we kept reminding people, this is a fund that is coming out of a women's movement. These organizations that we want to support are already there as part of a movement. They are community-based organizations. They are women's rights groups, professional women's networks. They are organized in different shapes and forms in different parts of the continent, in urban areas or rural areas, but they are there. And we have a network of people who can help with due diligence and referrals if we run into difficulties.
One of the things that you did at the helm of AWDF was to try and build the sustainability of AWDF, and I think in 2006 or so, if I remember very well, you actually ran a campaign around establishing an endowment, and that was at a time when not many organizations in Africa, I can even say that even today, we don't have many organizations that have thought of an endowment. Maybe we could talk a bit about your experiences then in terms of trying to set up that endowment, what you went through, because it's a technical thing to really think about setting up an endowment. It requires, more than just leading the institution. The technicalities and the mechanisms of endowment setting can be daunting, but you guys went and set up one of the first endowments in the continent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so there was a quiet phase to that endowment because we had the intention of building an endowment fund right from when we started. So in 2007, we did an official launch of the endowment. But if you go back a couple of years before then, in 2005, the Ford Foundation invited the African Women's Development Fund to join, I believe, 18 other foundations from different parts of the world for a program they called the Ford Initiative, Ford International Initiative to Strengthen Philanthropy, FIISP. And the objective of this initiative was to bring together grant-making foundations who were located in different parts of the world for peer learning, for mutual support and capacity building, and eventually endowment support, because they believe that quite a number of the participating funds will be able to absorb endowment and grants. But to be sure that that could happen, we had to go through this process of learning and sharing together for a 2-year period. And it was extremely beneficial to quite a number of us. And at the end of that process, in the early part of 2007, AWDF got an endowment from the Ford Foundation, and we had negotiated with the foundation that we were going to use part of that endowment to invest in real estate. And so that way, AWDF bought 2 buildings in Accra. One of them is our office. The other we let out for rent, and then the other part is invested in the money market, and it continues to grow. And when other donors who have been supporting us for a while saw that it was happening, we did get this endowment grant, then other donors also started giving us unrestricted support for us to add to the endowment fund. And 3 years ago, we got a large unrestricted gift, which we have also put into the endowment fund as well. So yes, it was the time. It was not something that was easy to do, or for many organizations, because having an endowment meant some degree of freedom, and you needed to have built a certain a level of track record before people could trust you with that, with such huge amount of resources. But the earlier work that we had put into strengthening the institution, ensuring that we had processes and systems in place, our leadership and governance, our communications, and our track record with our grantees and the movements that we were supporting, all that spoke for us, and we were able to take advantage of that opportunity at the time.
Yeah. So I recently spoke to some colleagues at AWDF because I'm doing some work on endowment building in Africa, looking at how to build an endowment, what type of an endowment, where to invest and how to invest, where to locate it in terms of jurisdiction, how to grow the endowment, among others. And one of the things that I picked up from my conversations with the team was that other than what you've just mentioned, money markets and real estate, there hasn't been another mechanism to try and grow the endowment. And as a result, it hasn't grown as much as you would have probably envisaged it to be, which raises the question around, to grow endowments, it would probably require more than just, having investments in money markets and real estate. It requires something bigger than that. But also part of it is the fluidity of the economy, especially in Ghana, where they've really not seen much economic growth. And so most institutions have really been struggling about where to locate endowments. Of course, politically and ideologically, you want to locate it in Africa, but we know our African economies are not most of them, but the majority of them are not growing as much as you would want them to grow. So looking back, are there things that you probably would have done differently in terms of setting up the endowment and how it has performed? I know you are not part of the team now, and so you may not probably have all the details. But when you look back now, with the hindsight, are there things that could have been done differently in terms of growing the endowment to probably one of the biggest in Africa as we speak now?
As I said earlier, endowments take time to grow.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have done anything differently at the time that I was there.
Yeah.
At least up to the point that I left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's up to the current leadership to, although I'm still on the board, but it's up to the current leadership to look at what is happening in the world now with regard to, fiscal opportunities and so on. But the thing is, Becky, at the end of the day, when you are a women's fund or a non-profit, you are working with public funding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 100% of something is better than 0% of nothing.
Yeah.
You don't want to take the kind of risk that might look great on paper or on recommendation, or because someone else has had the luck to try it, and then when it gets to your turn, that's when COVID happens, and then everything evaporates.
Yeah.
So I think caution. No one ever got hurt by being cautious.
Yeah.
I think there are opportunities that can be explored both within the continent and beyond, and the important thing is the capital that was raised at the time has been there, and the capital is not exactly the same. It hasn't grown, exponentially, but there is capital there that can be leveraged, and I'm glad that I was a part of that process.
And during your time, you were also part of the formation of AGN, then the African Grantmakers Network, which is now the African Philanthropy Network.
Yes. And
we actually had the honor of being hosted by AWDF, and you were the executive director at the time. So AWDF did not just focus on this Pan-African role on supporting movements, but it was also part of the broader philanthropy ecosystem. And I doubt if we have done enough homage, really, to you and AWDF for the formation of APN, which has for years now been one of the continental bodies on philanthropy. So I also want to take this opportunity to just thank you, because if it wasn't for you and many others, of course, I don't think we would have APN today. But you were gracious enough with your team to actually host a group of 25 foundations in 2009 when we set up APN. So you and I recently with Janet were on a panel
Yes.
where we were talking about 15 years back in terms of where we are today and where we were then. Maybe we can restate some of the reflections that you had, looking back, from the time APN was established to today, and also maybe explaining why AWDF found it useful, but also something to program around APN.
Yes, thank you, Becky. When we were part of the Ford IISP for those 2 to 3 years, from 2005, I think the convenings went on up to 2008, even early 2009.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful time. The Ford Foundation would invite us to different parts of the world. We went to Puerto Rico, we went to Brazil, we went to Dakar, we were in London, we went to Colombia, we went to, we even went to Russia, though I wasn't part of the team that went to Russia, but there was that opportunity. We went to Poland, we were in Hungary. There were so many exciting places that we went to where we had all these convenings, and we learned a lot from each other, and we built relationships with one another. And then there were, just shortly before Ford ISP, there was something else that Ford had been involved with on the continent.
Yeah.
And AWDF hadn't been a part of that program, but we were invited to a convening in Jinja in Uganda when they were closing off the project. And basically we're telling those who have been part of the process that this was the last convening, and basically saying goodbye. And shortly after that, they reconvened another group of us for the Ford ISP. Now, there were only 3 African foundations who were involved in the Ford ISP. The African Women's Development Fund, led by me, Trust Africa, led by Dr. Kwasi Aidu, and then the Kenya Community Development Foundation, led by Janet Moyo. So we would attend all these convenings with our board chairs, because we had to bring our board chairs along. And we built a really close working relationship. So one day, as we were having lunch, I said to Akwasi and Janet, you know, these very generous people who have been bringing us together, they're going to stop this after a while, and we are going to be left on our own. Are we going to wait till they bring us together and say goodbye, till we know that we actually need to now start having conversations with other African foundations who have not had the opportunity to be a part of this process, but could benefit from us all working together? And you all know the proverb that we have an equivalent of in different African languages. If you want to go a distance, you can go on your own. You'll get there in good time. If you don't want anyone tying you down. But if you want to go far, you go with others. And so that is how we agreed that we would come together as Africa grant makers. And so at AWDF, I offered that we would host the first meeting in, I think that was sometime in July, August 2009. And we all came together, and unanimously, there was no dissenting voice. There was no one who said, oh, well, okay, it was nice to have come to Accra, but why did we come all this way to talk about this and waste our time? Unanimously, everyone agreed that it was time to have our own space as African grant-making foundations, and that's how AGN was born. And so we had our first annual conference in October, November 2010, and since then the network has been going from strength to strength. And I was so touched to attend the 15th anniversary last year at Victoria Falls, and to see how big the network has become. We are now the African Philanthropic Network, how big it has become, how robust the engagements are, how committed and dynamic the field has become. It's really heartwarming, and it goes to show that relationship building, as I said earlier, continuous engagement, focus, and even when we run into obstacles, just sticking at it, it all adds up to something. It all comes together, and we are capable as Africans, as African intellectuals, as African activists, philanthropists or philanthropoids. We are capable of building our own institutions and sustaining them.
And of course, I mean, most people might not even know this, that even after you had stepped down, and you had gone to become the first lady of Ekiti State, you still remained connected to AGN and APN. I remember we had a strategy session in Bellagio, yes. and you're already, the first lady of Ekiti State, and you came and spent, the whole time there helping APN to grow. I just think that we need to find ways of documenting these, because if we don't, then, if you don't tell the story, somebody else will tell it in their own ways. And so I just want us to make sure that, every little contribution or intervention that colleagues have made, we find ways of documenting it. And so when I met you and I said we need to find time for you to document this is part of it, because I don't think I've seen it in any of the writings where it talks about you continuing assisting APN or AGN, even post your role as the director of AWDF. And the time when you came to Bellagio, you were no longer the director of AWDF.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we document that, and we thank you for continued support.
And I continued to attend APN meetings. I was at that strategic thinking and planning meeting in Bellagio. I attended the conference in 2012 in Johannesburg, and I was in Arusha as well.
2014,
Exactly. I would have made it to Entebbe in 2022. 2022. But there was an outbreak of Ebola at that time, and and that became difficult. And then I was in Victoria Falls last year. Yes.
Thank you so much. So I was saying, Bisi, you are one of the people who also were part of the group that went to Beijing, and it's going to be, I think this is 30 years, and I know you've got thoughts around some activities or interventions or even reflections, because I think it's a milestone that should not be left unattended to. Maybe we can hear some of the thoughts that you have and the activities that you've been thinking about.
Some of us have been talking about how to approach Beijing at 30.
Yeah.
5 years ago, when we were thinking about Beijing plus 25, I reached out to a group of sisters who I went to Beijing with. I was responsible for coordinating a group of at least 22 women from Africa and Europe to go to the Beijing conference. And I'm in touch with at least 14 of them out of the 22. So I reached out to them and I told them it's going to be 25 years after Beijing. Can we think about how we would like to commemorate, this, put our thoughts together. Maybe we might even be able to come up with some kind of a reflective document this year. And everyone was excited. And the idea was that we would do that. And for those of us who will be attending the Commission on the Status of Women in New York in March 2020, we'd use that as an opportunity to share our findings and then project towards the future. And we were all very excited about that happening. And then COVID struck. And then that, got put aside. Now it's 30 years. So I've reached out to the same set of sisters to say, okay, it's not Beijing plus 30, it's not Beijing plus 25 any longer. And we are now committed to ensuring that we write reflective pieces. It could be as detailed or, as concise as we would like it, but we will, we will share our reflections on what we think has happened since Beijing. What have we done individually as African feminist activists? What have we done collectively? What struggles have we faced? And how do we see ourselves having engagements, intergenerational engagements with younger women as we look to them to start carrying forward the work that still needs to be done on the continent. So, for example, in March of this year, we are going to have a whole series of activities at the Commission on the Status of Women. and some of us are going to be having engagements there, and I'm sure there are going to be a number of publications that you'll be seeing around. There will also be quite a number of engagements online. I'm co-convening a Zoom meeting, for example, with a number of Nigerian women who went to Beijing. That's going to be done at the end of February, and we'll try and get a document out of that. And so throughout the year, I'm sure we're going to see different things. Some organized by the UN, because I'm sure the CSW is going to review Beijing Plus 30, and I'm sure they're going to do something at the UN General Assembly in September as well. But the women's movements around the world are also going to be doing a number of things. And if people are not thinking of doing so now, I'd like to encourage them. Because we've gained a lot of things since Beijing, but we've also lost quite a number of things as well. So it sometimes feels as if we take 5 steps forward and we take 10 back. So whether they are achievements or gains or both, we need to record them for what they are and see what we've learned along the way, and then push forward.
I wanted to go back a bit to the formation of AGN, AWDF, and I don't know if you remember, I don't remember which meeting it was. You were talking about how annoyed at times you get when you go to these international meetings. Somebody listens to you speak, and then they come back and say, "You are so smart, I want to hire you." I don't know if you remember, but that has stuck with me for years and years.
Really?
You were so annoyed that people would come to you and say, "You are so smart, can I hire you?"
Yes, Becky, because then it was assumed that, African Women's Development Fund, I mean, please, okay, you're doing great work, but, we have the Ford Foundation, we have the Gates Foundation, they can pay so much more, we have the United Nations, and I wasn't looking for another job all the years I was at AWDF. It was my passion, it was my soul, it was, for me, I wanted this organization to be the place that other people would want to come to and work, or would want to come and serve on our boards, not to, to jump all over the place. It's fine, career progression, there's nothing wrong with career progression to move from one place to the other, but for me, as a founder of AWDF at that time, trying to create that space and trying to make it a space that could achieve all the things we wanted it to achieve, the idea of abandoning that to go and start nursing other people's babies was not something that appealed to me at all.
But do you think that has changed today?
I haven't used it as leverage with my board at the time. Let's talk.
That's so funny. But I was saying, do you think that attitude has changed in the field of philanthropy today? Or there's still a feeling that African institutions are still maybe at a particular position when compared to global North institutions?
Those things never really change. So what you do to that's why I keep emphasizing relationships.
Right.
So one way to get around that is to ensure that we have the right kind of relationships, we are keyed into the right kinds of networks, and so we can have the support systems, the friendships, the mentoring that will enable us build the resilience to enable us thrive, either as individual leaders in the field or as institutions.
So let's move to the second segment of your other life, which is after the helm of AWDF, politics happen. You become the first lady of Ekiti State twice. I'm not so sure that I've come across a first lady who pushed so many legislative pieces as you did. I'm not so sure. There might be some, but I was looking at the number of laws that were passed during your time and thinking, this is something that most people work for years and years to actually get it through, especially when you're working with politicians. How important and influential is it to get into some of those positions, because most of us in philanthropy and civil society would actually shy away from getting into politics, because we think, no, that's not our role. Our role is to hold them accountable, as if we don't want to be held accountable ourselves. But you actually went in there and used your position to really get legislative policies and frameworks to be passed.
Yes, well, we have said that for so long as civil society practitioners on the continent. This is our space, this is our turf, this is our lane, and all we need to do is just hold the government accountable. And then we will be here as the conscience and the voice of the people of the community. Well, that's fine, but it's not a sustainable strategy. We do have to leave room for some of us entering into those murky waters.
Yeah.
That is how change can happen on a sustainable scale, on a large scale. And that is how accountability can be deepened. I know, for example, that when my husband became governor of Ekiti State, because he is from civil society himself, scholar, human rights, activist, political activist, and so on, he was aware that he was going to be under scrutiny from his original constituency. And I, who was there to support him, I knew that I would be asked questions. Okay, so Bisi, what's happening? What are you doing? What does this mean for you? And so I felt I really did need to make a difference. And over the years, being a feminist activist, a grant maker, and someone who has worked on different movement building strategies, I've known how hard it is to have an enabling environment for women's empowerment and gender equality issues to be taken seriously. And when we got to Ekiti in 2010, it was the way I can describe that area when it comes to women's rights issues. It was like a ground zero. Now let me just give you a bird's eye view. Around the time, just before my husband got into office in October 2010, I got a phone call from my brother-in-law. I was still in Accra at the time. So my husband's older brother, who lives there in Ekiti, he called me and he said, Mama B, because that's what he calls me, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? Our party at the time wanted to conduct local government elections. And there were 16 local governments, which meant 6 seats for chairmen or chairs were available. And then there were seats for the vice chair. So that meant that 32 seats were up for grabs. And the party leaders did not want to give any women a ticket to run. There was a woman who had indicated an interest, a woman from our local government. She wanted to be vice chair, not even the chair, vice. And they said no. So he called me and said, what can you do? Because this woman has been courageous enough to come forward to say she wants to run, and they're giving her the runaround. That was then in 2010. Now, early 2025, as we speak, in Ekiti State, the deputy governor of Ekiti State is a woman. The secretary to the state government is a woman. The head of service is a woman. The deputy speaker in the State House of Assembly is a woman. We have a significant number of women in the cabinet, in all the local governments, and the president of the State Court of Appeal also is a woman. So the landscape has shifted considerably when it comes to recognizing that women can be leaders. And all that was as a result of me saying we need to have an understanding as a people that women matter, women are important. So I fought hard for those legislative provisions that you speak of. I was able to champion 7 laws that ensured that women had rights, access, voice, and so on, as well as a number of policies. And then we put in place a whole lot of institutions that could also support those laws we put in place. For example, when it comes to sexual violence, I was able to get a sexual assault referral center in place, actually 3, a main one and 2 satellites, as well as a shelter for women and girls in distress, then economic empowerment programs, and so on. So those positions, whether it's governor, first lady, and so on, they are positions of trust.
Right.
You're only there for a limited period of time. So you need to ask yourself, what can I do to really make a difference?
Yeah.
And I felt that one way in which I could make a difference was to ensure that women had voice and women had opportunities. And I'm also grateful for the fact that I didn't just do it for Ekiti. Because during my husband's second term, he was the chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum from 2019 to 2022. Right. And that made me chair of the Nigerian Governors Spouses Forum. So I was also able to encourage the spouses of other governors around the country for them to take a keen interest in an area in which they knew they could make a difference. And most of us agreed that it should be violence against women. And we also did a lot of joint work on drug abuse as well and its impact on young people and children.
So for our readers, I mean, some of the laws that you campaigned for will include the gender-based violence prohibition law. There's also, which was revised in October 2019, also an equal opportunities bill, an HIV anti-stigma bill, a treatment, care and protection bill for sexually abused minors. The Ekiti State mental health law, the Ekiti State gender composition law, the multiple best trust fund, and of course, like you said, we're also the chair of the state GPV management committee, among other things. So I like I was saying, I'm really not aware of any first lady, even at a national level, who has managed to do most of this. And I think this is commendable. And it's a case study that when we do get an opportunity, we might want to write extensively on, so that when others get the same opportunity, they make the best out of it. Because more often we do have people get into positions of power and they don't get to represent the constituencies that they went on the ticket for. So I think, I mean, when I was looking at the laws and all the achievements that you achieved as the First Lady during the 2 terms, I started wondering whether or not we are not getting things wrong by wanting to just stay in civil society, which is our comfort zone, and not potentially use some of the experiences in civil society around campaigns, around advocacy, to actually go in there and make those changes. Because I'm positive that a lot of what you also dug from or dug into was your experience as an activist over a long period of time.
Yes, of course. And I would find myself in meetings with civil servants who have been doing their work for so long in the ministries, education, health, women affairs, and so on. And because I come from this background and I've done this work in different parts of the world, when I share these perspectives with them, it used to excite them. Initially they'll be scared, like, what is this woman talking about? But when you take them through and, we make it a joint learning opportunity, they really, people would really appreciate it. I remember I was also chair of the State AIDS Commission Agency. And I remember how scandalized the migrant committee was when we had this meeting once, and I told them, in one of your strategies, you need to ensure that you have outreach with the hotels, because we need to, understand how sex workers are faring and, what rights they have in terms of, protection and so on. And they looked at me and like, is this woman, crazy? And then they went to a conference somewhere, I think one of the casters, and they came back and they said, Your Excellency, that thing you were talking about commercial sex workers, you were really right, because, it's a who. I said, of course it is.
Let me tell you a story about my experience at Trust Africa. So we were setting up a program on HIV and AIDS. So we are learning, we are getting in there. There's a meeting that we organize to strategize and, do a strategy with all actors in the sector. HIV and AIDS. I get to Dakar, what was the name? King Fahd, at the hotel. I go there, I get to the meeting. I go in, and as soon as we start opening the meeting, I'm stopped. They say, wait a minute, before we can proceed, there are things that are missing here. So I'm asking, what's missing? And they say, this is an HIV and AIDS conference. Why are there no condoms in bathrooms, in our bags, etc.? And I'm asking myself, why do we need to? I was so ignorant at the time. Like, why do we need them? I got a lashing of the time because I didn't know that you need. So I'm probably was like those civil servants.
Yeah, like, okay, what is she talking about?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. The second one, now I was a bit more advanced. Yeah, we set another meeting in Johannesburg. We have the meeting. We start, no problem. We had invited everyone, including sex workers. No problem. The following day, we start the meeting. They stop back and say, wait a minute, we have a problem here. So what is the problem? Say, there are people who were disturbing our peace last night after the conference. What are you talking about? No, there are people who were soliciting for sex. And then sex workers raise their hand and say, but you invited us knowing that this is our profession, this is our job. So this was after the conference had ended and we're now doing our work. Of course, I think what I'm trying to say is that there are so many people who operate in this space. They are even responsible for setting laws, but they're actually not in tune with what is happening.
Exactly.
And for me, those two events were so impactful in terms of understanding the dynamics, not just in setting laws, but also in their implementation and what really goes around. And so I really relate with the story that you are saying. Yeah.
Exactly.
So finally, they then agreed to.
Yes, no. So they, no, they didn't. They because of the position I was in, they found it hard to disagree, but they were bewildered. Let me just put it that way. But I think with time I earned respect of a lot of people because they had opportunities to go around other states, and they would then become aware that they are way ahead, in their thinking and their practice on a whole number of things. And then some had an opportunity to go outside of the country for peer learning. So after a while, people then understand that you come from this place of knowledge, experience, and practice. And for me, it was also a valuable learning opportunity as well, because, as you said earlier, we feel so secure in our safe spaces in civil society, in our comfort zones. We don't understand how a lot of these other spaces operate. We don't know some of the things that drive them. And we get very frustrated, and we feel that we keep hitting our heads against brick walls. So it's important for us to have, as part of our strategies, an ongoing relationship with all sectors, with the public sector, with the corporate sector. It shouldn't be when there's a crisis that we then remember that we need to carry placards against any of these spaces. We need to have an ongoing relationship with them, sit on commissions together if we have an opportunity, sit on boards together, have the kind of relationship that can enable us share knowledge and information and strategies.
So the last segment that I want us to cover is you as a writer. I'm aware that you've already done your memoirs, but you have also been documenting different pieces of your work, either through a website platform, but also you are here now because there's an attempt to try and put everything together. Also, maybe a few thoughts around what it has been trying to document your experiences, write your experiences up to now.
Yes. So in 2013, I turned 50. And I thought, just up to that time, that it was time to put something together about what I've done with myself. So I put two publications together. One was a memoir, which is called Speaking for Myself. Speaking Above a Whisper. And then the other is a collection of essays and speeches over a 25-year period.
Yeah.
And that is the one that is called Speaking for Myself. Yes, perspectives on social and feminist activism in Africa. And in 2016, I set up a website, Above Whispers, and I wanted to use it as a space for my peers to engage more with social media as opposed to just checking out the latest gossip and posting photographs of ourselves and our children and grandchildren on holiday.
Yeah.
And as part of my website, I committed to writing a weekly column known as Loud Whispers. And so I've written these Loud Whispers as faithfully as possible every week since then. And I've produced 3 volumes of Loud Whispers. Volume 1 was produced in 2017, and that is called Loud Whispers.
Yeah.
Volume 2 was produced in 2020, and that is called Where is Your Rapper? And Volume 3 was produced in 2023, and that is called Demand and Supply.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges of writing every week is you then ask yourself, okay, what new can I say this week?
Yeah.
And in what format can I say it? So most times I write essays, but sometimes I write short stories or I write poetry. And so those 3 volumes are a combination of those different genres. And then 2 years ago, I did a book reading. And someone at the book reading suggested that the short stories and the poetry that I've done, that I put them into a separate volume to encourage younger writers.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good idea. So I did that in 2013. And that is called A Tray of Locust Beans. So I'm very pleased that I was able to come into. I've always written, all through my life I've always written. But I think you get to a stage in your life when you now want to give it more time and more attention.
Yeah.
And maybe I feel I have a lot more to say. I don't know, more time to say it. But I'm really grateful for this phase of my life.
Yeah.
And because you have challenged me so many times when it comes to documenting my experiences in philanthropy, first of all, I'd like to assure you that a number of those stories have been stated in some of these publications I've mentioned, in the book of essays Speaking for Myself, and in my memoirs. But there are other things that I've done over the years that have not been published or have been published but haven't been pulled together. So I'm in the process of pulling all that together into a publication that I'm calling Put Your Money Where Your Heart Is, which is the tagline we came up with for AWDF back then.
Right. You're a busy person, and I was saying to my colleagues and everyone, I just don't understand how Bisi could spend at least 2 weeks in a bush. Beginning of the year. And so what has been your experience so far with this initiative? It's still a pilot project for us, Nawe and other colleagues, but we would want to find ways of really making it an annual event, but also improving it, because it sits very nicely with our Women in Philanthropy initiative within CAPSI, where we have noted the gap when it comes to women in philanthropy, especially in Africa, whether it's in the area of knowledge development, research, teaching, among others. And so we want to use the initiative as a way to addressing those gaps. And so one of them is actually this documentation piece and writing. And so we are fully committed to making sure that where resources permit, we are able to do this on an annual basis. But it would be good to hear what your experience has been, and also some of the areas where we can also improve, so that those that come after you might actually find it even much better than perhaps how it is now.
Thank you. I have absolutely loved it. I'm actually glad that you scheduled this for the first part of January of the new year. Because as you get into the year, we get busy, we have other obligations. And so this was really great timing. Maybe for some of us who have so much to do over the Christmas and New Year period, maybe after that we just want to take a break and rest and not have to jump onto a plane to go somewhere. So there was that anxiety. But I've had an opportunity to rest, to reflect, and to write.
Yeah.
I'm not that much of a walker. A lot of sisters around have been walking very long distances. They enticed me to go walk with them a few days ago. And I managed to walk 6 kilometers.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the 6 kilometers I walked, but it is not something that I would do. And I pride myself on, loving walks. I love to walk.
Yeah.
But 6 kilometers? But it's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
This is a great facility. The staff here are really nice, lovely people. The food is absolutely delightful. And the company, the sisters I've shared this space with, it's been really, really great.
Yeah.
And I would love to come back. And I will haunt you if you don't invite me back.
Definitely you'll be invited. Bisi, I know we can continue talking because I really want to, like you said, download you. Mm-hmm. But I think it's fair for us to say that you are working on putting your other writings together, and those that actually want to read even more about you, there's already existing publications that are out there, even a website where people can go to. Mm-hmm. So I would want us to thank you immensely for taking your time to firstly come and be with, to be in company of women that are coming to write. The majority of them here have heard about you and they are meeting you for the first time. The majority of them. And so for most people, even if they don't write, the fact that they've met you is enough. But secondly, for really taking time to talking to us, I know that there's still a lot of plans that we have ahead. But I really want to thank you for what we have done in this hour, because at least we can share something with our audience, and also looking forward to reading more of your works that you have produced. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Becky. And once again, I'm really delighted to have been a part of this. And I look forward to working with you on more projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was Bisi Adeleye-Fayemi joining us here on the margins of the writing retreat at the First Rural Facility. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.